Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in this rich body of wisdom that's before us, not only in the written text that's before us, but also in the hearts and aspirations of all the faces that you see in front of you. So we are beginning a new book in Torah. This is the book of Deuteronomy. So we'll start off with chapter 1, verse 1 of the book of Deuteronomy. We'll read through the English translation of our weekly portion. I'll share with you a focused study about it, and then we'll open it up for our collective and collaborative conversation about it. If you'd like to go ahead at this point and unmute, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for the opportunity of this moment. Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu Torah. Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Let me share with you the opening few verses, and then I'll provide an opportunity for others to read as well. These are the words that Moses addressed to all Israel on the other side of the Jordan, through the wilderness in the Arabah near Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazarot, and Di Zachab. It is 11 days from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by the Mount Seir route. It was in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, that Moses addressed the Israelites in accordance with the instructions God had given him for them, after he had defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt in Heshbon, and King Og of Bashan, who dwelt at Ashtaroth and Edrei. On the other side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to expound this teaching. He said, and Sherry, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 6?
I'm sorry, were you calling on me?
No, I was calling on Sherry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
The Lord our God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, "You have stayed long enough at this mountain. Start out and make your way to the hill country of the Amorites and to all their neighbors in the Arba, the hill country, the Shephelah, and Negeb, the seacoast, the land of the Canaanites, and the Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. See, I place the land at your disposal. Go take possession of the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to assign to them and to their heirs after them."
Thank you. Steve, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 9?
Okay, thank you, Robin. Thereupon I said to you, I cannot bear the burden of you by myself. The Lord your God has multiplied you until you are today as numerous as the stars in the sky. May the Lord, the God of your fathers, increase your numbers 1,000 and bless you as he promised you. How can I bear unaided the trouble of you and the burden and the bickering? Pick from each of your tribes men who are wise, discerning, and experienced, and I will appoint them as your heads. You answered me and said, what you propose to do is good. So I took your tribal leaders, wise and experienced men, and appointed them heads over you. Chiefs of thousands, chiefs of hundreds, chiefs of fifties, chiefs of tens, and officials for your tribes. I charge your magistrates at that time as follows. Hereat you follow men and decide justly between any man and fellow Israelites or a stranger. You should not be partial in judgment. Hear out low and high alike. Fear no man, for judgment is God's. In any matter that is too difficult,
I don't want to use the lawyer's terms.
bring to me, and I will hear. Thus I instructed you at that time about the various things that you should do.
Thank you. Richard, do you want to read a little bit, starting at verse 19?
Yes, well, thank you. We set out from Horeb and traveled the great and terrible wilderness that you saw. along the road to the hill country of the Amorites, as the Lord our God had commanded us. When we reached Kadesh Barnea, I said to you, you have come to the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving to us. See, the Lord your God has placed the land at your disposal. Go up, take possession, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. Fear not, and be not dismayed. Then all of you came to me and said, let us send men ahead to reconnoiter the land for us, and bring back word on the route we shall follow and the cities we shall come to. I approved of this plan, and so I selected 12 of your men, one from each tribe. They made for the hill country, came to the Wadi Eshkol, and spied it out. They took some of the fruit of the land with them and brought it down to us, and they gave us this report. It is a good land that the Lord our God is giving us.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Rachel, if you'd like to read a little bit. And there's been a special request if Rachel could read in Hebrew, and then I'd be happy to provide the translation as well.
So would you like me to read from here 26 or
Yeah,
from the beginning?
How
in
about
Hebrew?
from 26 through 28? Okay.
Okay. ולא אביתם לעלות ותאמרו את פי אדוני אלוהיכם ותרגנו באלוהיכם ותאמרו בשנת אדוני איתכו הוציאנו מארץ מצרים לתת אותנו ביד האמורי להשמידנו. אנה אנחנו עלים אחינו המסור את ליבנו לאמור עם גדול ורם ממנו ערים גדולת בשורות בשמיים וגם בני ענקים ראינו שם.
Thank you so much. And the translation of that is, yet you refused to go up and flouted the command of Adonai your God. You sulked in your tents and said, it is because that God hates us, that God brought us out of the land of Egypt to hand us over to the Amorites, to wipe us out. What kind of place are we going to? Our kinsmen have taken the heart out of us, saying, we saw there are people stronger and taller than we, large cities with walls sky high, and even Anakites. Anna, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 29?
I said to you, have no dread or fear of them. None other than the eternal your God who goes before you will fight for you, just as God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes, and in the wilderness where you saw how the eternal your God carried you, as a householder carries his son, all the way that you traveled until you came to this place. Yet for all that you have no faith in the eternal your God, who goes before you on your journeys to scout the place where you are to encamp, in fire by night and in cloud by day, in order to guide you on the route that you are to follow.
Thank you. Let me invite June. Let me invite June, if you'd like to continue there at verse 34.
Thank you, Rabbi. When the Lord heard your loud complaint, he was angry. He vowed, not one of these men, this evil generation, shall see the good land that I swore to give to your fathers. None except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, he shall see it, and to him and his descendants will I give the land on which he set foot, because he remained loyal to the Lord. Because of you, the Lord was incensed with me too, and he said, you shall not enter it either. Joshua, son of Nun, who attends you, he shall enter it. Imbue him with strength, for he shall allot it to Israel. Moreover, your little ones, who you said would be carried off, your children who do not yet know good from bad, they shall enter it. To them will I give it, and they shall possess it. As for you, turn about and march into the wilderness by the way of the Sea of Reeds.
Thank you so much, Jude. David and Susan, would you like to continue there, starting with verse 41?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And you answered and said to me, we have offended the Lord. We ourselves will go up and do battle as all that the Lord our God has charged us. And you girded each man his weapons, and you presumed to go up to the high country. And the Lord said to me, Say to them, you shall not go up and you shall not do battle, for I am not in your midst, lest you be routed by your enemies. And I spoke to you and you did not heed, and you rebelled against the Lord's word, and you were defiant and went up to the high country. And the Amorite who dwells in the high country came out to meet you, and then pursued you as the bees do. And they pounded you in Seir as far as Hormah. And you came back and wept before the Lord, and the Lord did not listen to your voice and did not give ear to you. Go ahead.
So you lived in Kadesh many days as you lived there. And we turned and traveled to the wilderness by way of the Red Sea, as Hashem spoke to me, and we stayed around Mount Seir for many days. And Hashem said to me, saying, you've had enough of staying around this mountain, turn north, and commanded the people, saying, you're crossing the border of your brothers, the children of Esau, who live in Seir, and they'll be afraid of you, so be very watchful. Don't get agitated at them, because I won't give you any of their land, even as much as a footstep, because I've given Mount Seir to Esau as a possession. Food you shall buy from them with money, and then you'll eat, and water too you shall purchase from them with money, and then you'll drink, because Hashem your God has blessed you in all your hands' works. He has known you're walking in this big wilderness. These 40 years, Hashem your God has been with you.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Kath, if you'd like to continue there at verse 8.
Thank you, Rabbi. We then moved on away from our kinsmen, the descendants of Esau who live in Seir, away from the road of the Arabah, away from the Elath and Ezion Geber, and we marched on in the direction of the wilderness of Moab. And Hashem said to me, do not harass the Moabites or provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land as a possession. I have assigned Ar as a possession to the descendants of Lot. It was formerly inhabited by the Emim, a people great and numerous and as tall as the Anakites. Like the Anakites, they are counted as Rephaim, but the Moabites call them Emim. Similarly, Seir was formerly inhabited by the Horites, but the descendants of Esau dispossessed them, wiping them out and settling in their place, just as Israel did in the land they were to possess, which the Lord had given to them.
Thank you so much, Kath. And Robert, would you like to continue there at verse 13?
Yes, thank you. Now rise up, said I, and get you over the brook, get you over the brook of Zeriah. And we went over the brook Zered, and the space in which we came from Kadesh Barnea until we were come over the brook Zered was 38 years, until all the generation of the men of war were wasted out from among the host, as the Lord sware unto them. For indeed the hand of the Lord was against them to destroy them from among the host until they were consumed. So it came to pass, when all the men of war were consumed and dead from among the people, that the Lord spake unto me, saying, thou art to pass over through Ar, the coast of Moab, this day. And when thou comest nigh over against the children of Ammon, distress them not, nor meddle with them. For I will not give thee of the land of the children of Ammon any possession, because I have given it unto the children of Lot for a possession.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Martin with the beautiful red hat. Would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 20?
I'm sorry, I don't have the writings.
That's fine. We're so glad that you're with us. Let me invite Jim. Would you like to continue reading there at verse 20?
Thank you, Rabbi. It too is counted as Rephaim country. It was formerly inhabited by Rephaim, whom the Ammonites call Zamzummim, a people great and numerous and as tall as the Anakites. Adonai wiped them out so that the Ammonites dispossessed them and settled in their place, as he did for the descendants of Esau, who lived in Seir, when he wiped out the Horites before them, so that they dispossessed them and settled in their place, as is still the case. So too with the Avim, who dwelt in villages in the vicinity of Gaza, the Caphtorim, who came from Crete, wiped them out and settled in their place. Up, set out across the Wadi Arnon. See, I give into your power Sihon, the Amorite king of Heshbon, and his land. Begin the occupation, engage him in battle. This day I begin to put the dread and fear of you upon the people everywhere under heaven, so that they shall tremble and quake, because you, whenever they hear you mention.
Thank you so much, Jim. Dan, would you like to read a little bit starting there at verse 26?
Thank you, Rabbi. I also charged Joshua at that time, saying,
So this is at verse 26,
maybe I
chapter
got too
2.
many.
Yeah.
Hang on. All right, get to the right page here. Then I sent messengers from the wilderness of Kemoth to King Sihon of Heshbon with an offer of peace as follows. Let me pass through your country. I will keep strictly to the highway, turning off neither to the right nor to the left. What food I eat, you will supply for money, and what water I drink, you will furnish for money. Just let me pass through, as the descendants of Esau who dwell in Seir did for me, and the Moabites who dwell in Ar, that I may cross the Jordan into the land that the Lord our God is giving us. The king Sihon of Heshbon refused to let us pass through because the Lord had stiffened his will and hardened his heart in order to deliver him into your power, as is now the case. And the Lord said to me, see, I began by placing Sihon and his land at your disposal. Begin the occupation, take possession of his land.
Thank you so much.
Sihon?
Is Joanne available? Would she like to read?
Sure.
It's starting
Where
at
do
32.
Verse 32 says Sihon.
Sihon with all his men took the field against us at Jahaz, and the Lord our God delivered him to us, and we defeated him and his sons and all his men. At that time we captured all his towns, and we doomed every town, men, women, and children, leaving no survivor. We retained as booty only the cattle and the spoil of the cities that we captured. From Aroer on the edge of Arnon Valley, including the town in the valley itself, to Gilead, not a city was too mighty for us. The Lord our God delivered everything to us, but you did not encroach upon the land of the Ammonites all along the Wadi Jabok and the towns of the hill country, just as the Lord our God had commanded.
Thank you so much. And Rose, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 3?
Chapter 3.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. We made our way up the road toward Bashan, and King Og of Bashan with all his troops took the field against us at Edrei. But Hashem said to me, do not fear him, for I'm delivering him and all his troops and his country into your power, and you will do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon. So our God Hashem, who also delivered into our power King Og of Bashan with all his troops, and we dealt in such a blow that no survivor was left. At that time, we captured all his towns. There was not a town that we did not take from them, 60 towns, the whole district of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan. All those towns were fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, apart from a great number of unwalled towns. We doomed them as we had done in the case of King Sihon of Heshbon. We doomed every town, men, women, and children, and retained as booty all the cattle and spoil of the towns.
Thank you, Rose. Let me invite Justin. Would you like to read starting with verse 8?
Thank you, Rabbi. At that time, we took the land out of the hands of the 2 kings of the Amorites, who were on that side of the Jordan, from the brook of Arnon to Mount Hermon. The Sidonians call Hermon Sirion, and the Amorites call it Senir. All the cities of the plain, and all Gilead, and all Bashan, to Salcha and Edrei, cities of the kingdom of Og in Bashan. For only Og, king of Bashan, was left from the remnant of the Rephaim. His bedstead was a bedstead of iron. It is not in Rabbah, the children of Ammon. 9 cubits was its length, and 4 cubits was its breadth, according to the cubit of a man. And in this land which we possessed at that time, from Aroer, which is by the brook of Arnon, and half of Mount Gilead and its cities, I gave to the Reubenites and to the Gadites. And the rest of Gilead and all Bashan, the kingdom of Og, I gave to the tribe of Manasseh. All the territory of Argob, all of Bashan, that is called the land of Rephaim. Jair, the son of Manasseh, took all the territory of Argob to the boundaries of the Geshurites and the Maacathites, and he called them even Bashan, after his own name, villages of Jair to this day. Unto Machir I gave Gilead. And to the Reubenites and to the Gadites I gave from Gilead to the brook of Arnon, the midst of the brook and the border, until the brook of Jabbok, which is the boundary of the children of Ammon.
Thank you so much, Justin. And Catherine, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 17? Okay. Kath, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 17? All right, then let me share with you. We also seized the Arabah from the foot of the slopes of Pisgah on the east to the edge of the Jordan, and from the Kinneret down to the sea of the Arabah, the Dead Sea. At that time I charge you, saying, Adonai your God has given you this country to possess. You must go as shock troops, warriors, all at the head of your Israelite kinsmen. Only your wives, children, and livestock, I know that you have much livestock, shall be left in the towns I have assigned to you, until God has granted your kinsmen a haven such as you have, and they too have taken possession of the land that Adonai your God is assigning them beyond the Jordan. Then you may return each to the homestead that I have assigned to him. I also charged Joshua at that time, saying, You've seen with your own eyes all that Adonai your God has done to these 2 kings. So shall God do to all the kingdoms into which you shall cross over. Do not fear them, for it is Adonai your God who will battle for you. That's our Torah portion for the week. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out at this time, as I'd like to share with you just a little bit of a focused study about it, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation. So last week, I suggested both in writing and in the teaching that the book of Numbers kind of represents the end of the traveling of the Israelites, because in the book of Deuteronomy, there's really no narrative, there's no forward movement, there's no human dynamic that's going on. What we'll see unfold in the book of Deuteronomy is Moses retelling the story of their journey, and then also reminding them of some specific obligations, laws, and rituals that the people are to perform. So in a sense, I was kind of minimizing the book of Deuteronomy. And then as I was studying it again this week, I read, oh, the book of Deuteronomy is really important. It is really a pivotal moment in the life of the Israelite people. And it really is the book that marks a very significant departure. And it's that sense that I would like to explore the extent to which the book of Deuteronomy marks a point of departure. But what's interesting from a stylistic point of view is that the book of Deuteronomy, which in Hebrew is Sefer Devarim, the book of words, is evocative in that sense of how all of Torah really began with Genesis, Bereshit, because the way our Torah opens up is with God speaking, and God speaking brings life into existence. And so as I thought about how important words and speech are in our tradition and to the opening up of Torah, I pondered and played with the notion of, well, and this is the way that the Torah is concluding. It's concluding with a book called Words, Speech, Utterances. But what's interesting, I realize, is that whereas in the book of Genesis, it is God who is speaking, and thereby causing life to come into existence. In the book of Deuteronomy, it is Moses who does all the speaking. And so I want to explore, what is that hinting at? What is that trying to teach us? What is the painting that this artist here is painting by using something from the past as an evocation and then painting something that is going to take us into the future? So, of course, one of the significant aspects of this whole journey has been the notion of a covenant. And there are, in fact, as we go through Torah, a series of covenants, and they're each quite different. And there is something that unifies at least three of them. So the first covenant that we encounter in Torah is the covenant that God makes with Noah. And there, nothing is really expected of Noah. If you will, it is a unilateral statement by God that God will no longer destroy the earth by flood, and presents the rainbow in the sky as a sign of God's covenant with Noah and with those who are descended from him. So it is not a very demanding covenant, if you will, on Noah. He merely receives it. The next covenant we get is between God and Abraham. And that one becomes a little bit more complex and a little bit more demanding, because Abraham must do something in response to that, and namely circumcision. So there is a requirement of Abraham to seal this covenant, if you will, with God. And then the next covenant is even more complex, and that we find in the book of Exodus, and that's the covenant that happens at Mount Sinai, where God proclaims to all the people of Israel what's expected of them, what will unify them with the source of all existence, with God. And in that setting, something is required of all the people, in which they have to verbally acknowledge and affirm and commit themselves to this covenant, which they do 3 times. The fourth covenant is the one that we're now exploring. It's in the book of Deuteronomy. But here, what's significant is this: whereas in the first 3, which were all initiated through the divine action, here in the book of Deuteronomy, it is Moses who recites the content and context of the covenant, and indicating that here it is not through divine initiative that the covenant is brought to the Israelite people, it is through human initiative. So I want to explore this transition that I think the book of Deuteronomy represents, and what it means for our own human and spiritual development. We have here a special Shabbat, which is coming up, this Shabbat called Shabbat Chazon, which means Shabbat of the vision. And it is traditionally is the Shabbat that immediately precedes a 3-week period of mourning, which is heightened with the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. And so we read these words from the prophet Isaiah immediately before we start this period of mourning. And it is a vision that the prophet has of a third temple, if you will, that will be built. And the notion within Jewish tradition is that this is a vision that is available to each of us to have a sense of a redemptive future. But here are the words that we read from this week's Haftarah portion that I think are very supplementary and complementary to, I think, what is the message of Deuteronomy. Here are some of the verses from this week's Haftarah from the prophet Isaiah. Learn to do good, aid the wronged, uphold the rights of the orphan, defend the cause of the widow. These are actions that we are called upon to fulfill in our everyday lives. And these are actions directed towards our relationships with other human beings, which I think is part and parcel of where the Deuteronomy is leading us in its lesson to prepare us, if you will, to cross over from this journey that we have been on with the Israelites, struggling to emerge out of exile, out of separation, out of the wilderness, out of the land of constraint, into the realm of responsibility, which is what the land of Canaan represents in our Torah. And if you turn over, I'd like to share with you an insight from one of the great 19th century Hasidic rabbis, Sfat Emet. Sfat Emet quotes from the book of Proverbs from chapter 5, verse 15. And he quotes this verse. Scripture says, drink from your own cistern, running water from your own well. If you look up a lot of commentary about, well, what exactly is that referring to? A lot of the commentary will say what it means is it's directed towards a man and indicating that a man should be faithful to his wife. Here's what Sfat Emet takes from this notion about what does it mean to drink from your own cistern, to drink running water from your own well. He writes, God placed a holy point into the very nature of each creature, a holy soul. It is called our cistern, for it is attached to the body. The more you take this soul light upon yourself, drawing your deeds to follow this light, the more the spirit and higher soul is added to you. This opens the wellspring that flows without end. This is flowing from your well. In keeping with the Hasidic tradition, which seeks to, in a sense, reorient the point of gravity about where does the spiritual battle take place. The Hasidic tradition says the redemptive battles that take place are not those that take place in the cosmos. They're ones that take place within each one of us. This is the site of battle. So this is, if you will, it is a reorientation of our point of focus in religious life, which I think is what is happening as well in the book of Deuteronomy. Before we get to our last quote, I'd like to take a look at our painting that's on this week's study sheet to see what more it can add to our sense of what I think is happening within the book of Deuteronomy. This is a painting by the great 19th century artist Edward Manet. It's called The Luncheon on the Grass. So Edward Manet is painting in the mid-19th century. It's a very interesting pivotal point. And as we'll see, Manet ends up representing, if you will, a point of departure from hundreds of years of classical art as the dominant form of aestheticism in Western art into something that becomes known as modern art. because from him will flow the Impressionists, the Post-Impressionists, those who begin to explore abstract expressionism, Cubism, and so forth. Manet is the first, really, to make this pivot. Classical art up until this time for hundreds of years have been focused on trying to express ideal forms or ideals, sense of beauty and truth and proportion. And so in that sense, it really saw everyday life as kind of a sordid reality, which was far inferior to the elevated transcendent reality that human beings should try and access. Manet becomes a modern rather than a classicist. He embraces changes in social and cultural life, and he paints everyday life. But it's interesting, he doesn't merely paint everyday life, he paints everyday life as a form of a reiteration, a reconstructing of something quite classical. So his painting here, The Luncheon on the Grass, is actually inspired by a Renaissance engraving by Marcantonio Raimondi, which in turn is based on a drawing by one of the great Renaissance artists, Raphael, who did a piece called The Judgment of Paris. And The Judgment of Paris is a work that Raphael did, which describes this myth of up in heavens of Paris, who's being called up into the heavens by Zeus to judge a beauty contest among the different goddesses. And eventually, Paris chooses Aphrodite because she promises to help him woo Helen, which Paris is successful with, and that eventually launches what becomes known as the Trojan War. So he's taking this scene, and he captures, that is, Manet captures a section of this work that Raphael did that was then turned into an engraving by Raimondi. And he takes three of these figures, and in the same, if you will, posture, reclining, sitting, talking to one another, he takes these three deities that have been portrayed in the Renaissance work, and here turns them into a couple of guys, a naked woman in the front, and then a half-clothed woman in the back. Manet presents this to the official exhibition that's held regularly by the established French Academy of Art, and they reject it. And they reject it not because there's a nude woman in there, but they reject it because it is too mundane, because it is not dedicated to the values of classical art, which are to focus on something that's ideal, something that's morally uplifting, something that tells a story from the mythology or the Bible. Instead, Manet has painted an ordinary, everyday scene. And that's what the art authorities find objectionable. So Manet takes his painting and he has it displayed instead at what's known as the exhibit of the Salon de Refusés, those who were in fact rejected by the official art establishment, and they held their own. This eventually inspires, about 10 years later, the Impressionists to hold their own art exhibitions independently. And that launches a whole new dimension of what it means to market art, who's in charge of selling art, who's in charge of showing art. And that's a story for another day. But here, what Manet has done is he's replaced divine beings with human beings. He's replaced the heavens with a riverbank in France. And he has, instead of a cosmic moment, which results in some world history-shaking event known as the Trojan War with a simple picnic lunch and perhaps sexual tryst. So here is a way in which Manet celebrates the everyday and the mundane, placing human beings rather than idealized forms of human beings or images of gods or goddesses as the proper and appropriate subjects for a work of art. This weekend, as I mentioned, we have Shabbat Chazon. And I want to suggest that this painting, as well as the theme within Deuteronomy, is represented by what Shabbat Chazon is all about. This notion that we all have the capacity to have a vision of what a third temple might look like, and to work towards the day when such a reality might take place. And the reality of a third temple, the notion that there will be a redemptive moment, is brought about by our human actions of how we take care of one another. So one view that some communities have is that the physical world is a crass place, which has no intrinsic worth. And the challenge of the soul is to transcend this crass dimension en route to a perfect, beautiful, and ideal heavenly paradise. The Jewish tradition is a little bit different. The Jewish tradition has acted upon the notion that the refinement of the physical world and an infusion of holiness and purpose into the mundane is our paramount objective. And it's the sanctification of the human body and the world at large that is the soul's purpose. In that sense, we can think of the book of Esther, which represents our final holiday in the Jewish calendar year, the holiday of Purim, is really the consummate Jewish story, because there it is the human being who's no longer relying on an external deity to transform the world and bring about a healing. Rather, that divineness has been assimilated into the human being who's acting on a high moral plane. If you turn back, I'd like to conclude with this comment by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And he wrote, "The people have to learn to fight their own battles. They must discover God as a force within, rather than a force outside that fights their battles for them. They must discern the God who is close, within the camp, and not one who is distant, who performs miracles, liberates the Israelites, brings plagues against the Egyptians, sends the people water from a rock and food from heaven, and divides the sea for them." Deuteronomy marks the move from divine initiative to human responsibility. And with that, I'd love to hear what you experienced, what you encountered, what you saw. I see that Martin of Red Hat has already raised his hand. So please, Martin, share with us your thoughts, and then I'll call upon Rose.
Well, first off, Rabbi, I'd really like to thank you for this class. It really is a wonderful class. My question was, when the early Israelites entered these lands, their lands, was there any way for any of those inhabitants to become some kind of naturalized citizen where they will help the Israelite nation? Were any of those stipulations made for them?
Fantastic. So I'm gonna defer that response for a moment, because I have a feeling David Phillips might want to have something to offer about that, and I'll get back to it. Okay. Let me call upon Rose first. Thank you, Martin, for that. It's a very good question. Let me call upon Rose.
Well, there are a couple of things that interest me about this Parsha is, he's kind of going back about the history, but the history itself is kind of a constant repetition. And it may be, the analogous to the practice that kids have to go through to learn a skill. And I think that that plays into a lot of what you were saying is eventually, you got to do it on your own. Because they go back and forth to the Sea of Reeds. Like, if I were an Israelite wandering around, it would just boggle my mind was, why do we keep coming back to that? And a lot of the themes too about hardening the king's heart so that there's justification for being destroyed. All of these things are, repetitions on these previously established themes. So that's kind of interesting. Prior to the meeting, I sent kind of my observation about this painting, this Manet painting, and I think you wanted me to bring that up, Rabbi.
Yeah.
First of all, when you think about it, it's surrealism, because here you have these goddesses who are somehow stuck in this scene of, these bourgeois French guys hanging out in a park, so it's a bit surrealistic. And I think that there's lots of ambiguity. Are these supposed to be goddesses and therefore they are actually in charge of the situation? And the one woman who's sitting down is actually looking directly out at the viewer, with her hands kind of like this saying, oh, isn't this interesting? She seems like she's in control versus making a statement more about objectification of women that was going on and still goes on, that they're just nothing more than bodies. So that's kind of interesting, but there's an element, I think, of surrealism, and I think that he was actually sticking it to the academy. I mean, that's what this is all about, saying, okay, you want, goddesses? Okay, we'll put them in here. Or, we'll put them, wearing earphones or, being on mopeds or something.
So I'm so glad that you focus on this woman, in the foreground. And, a nude woman was actually a rather classic subject for classical art for hundreds of years. But the notion in classical art was to present some kind of perfect, idealized form of a
She
woman.
was the goddess. A
And-
regular naked woman is what? I mean, something to be embarrassed about.
Well, here you have this woman who is, as you pointed out, staring straight at us, and is also a figure of a woman who is, you might say, a normal human body, not one that has been perfected and idealized. And in that sense, the way in which she is staring at us as a viewer, without any sense of shame, very direct, is also perhaps Manet's way of staring straight back at the French Academy and establishment of art, saying, I am beautiful the way I am. I don't need to be realized as this in this ideal form that you have been painting me as for hundreds of years. So it's a challenge to the establishment, as you pointed out. So let me call upon Catherine, David, Marty, and then I'll get back to Martin's point as well. Okay. So Catherine, please.
Okay. Well, this will take a different direction. I mean, one thing I like about this parshat is that we're reminded of not being partial in judgment and hear out low and high alike, which is the way jurisprudence should work in a democracy that we live in. So I like this idea of equanimity before the law that is brought up again. But one thing that puzzles me is this, that we have obviously limited passage to the other side. And it's limited not just to this Caleb and Joshua, but to children who don't know good from evil. And so it's tabula rasa in terms of these teachings. And we have this sense that Moses, who does represent a kind of collective memory, a memory of this experience and a memory of teachings, is not going to be able to go across. And so that raises the question of where will memory be? Where will memory reside?
I love this, Kat, and I want to call on other people by you've just inspired me. So to say, so we have this, we have this kind of mythology, this story that when a human being is born, an angel kisses us right here, and right before we emerge from the mother's womb, right before then, we have full knowledge of everything. And then as soon as we emerge from the womb, we get kissed here and we forget everything. And so in a sense, our lives are a way to recover what we once knew. And so that's perhaps what the notion that you're getting at here is that the institutional memory is not going over with them. It's going to be, everyone's going to have to work at it themselves to recall how they got there, what their ancestors did. And that's part of the human project. All right. So let me call upon David, Susan, Marty, Richard, Steve. Okay. David and Susan, go ahead and unmute.
So what you made me think of is that's one of the reasons why we have this book, is so that Moses can recap what has happened and what's been learned and impart it to those going over.
Yeah. So go ahead, David.
Yeah, I kind of felt invited to respond to the question of was there any opportunity for the people in these lands that were to be possessed and who were dispossessed or all killed off to become Jewish or become in some way associated with the Jewish community and adapt to or assimilate to the new society? And I am a convert, so the question hits me pretty squarely. And all I can respond is, well, this is a story about how God gave us this land, and we took it, the whole thing, without exception, is a very anti-non-Jewish people story. But at the beginning of our story here, back in Exodus, when we fled Egypt, we brought along with us Egyptians that are described as a mixed multitude, people who in one way or another felt attached, at least some of us, and became part of our community that's now arriving with everyone else, or at least their children are, to dispossess and possess this new community. So like one of the reasons why I love Judaism is that it has it contradicts itself, and yet in the tension of those contradictions is where I find insight and stuff that's meaningful to me on deeper personal levels. In this case, what I'm feeling about it is the Jewish community and the Jewish tradition has both sides to it. It has a very anti-non-Jewish element to it, which you see in the paper sometimes. And it has a very accepting, and I want you, non-Jew, to see and hear and perceive and understand our wisdom and teachings. And we feel, and we would like to welcome you into an embrace of a dialogue about who you are, what you think, your philosophy, etc., and ours, because we feel that in that kind of dialogue between Jew and non-Jew, we and everything are improved. The future is better.
Thank you both. And let me supplement what you just mentioned as a way of also responding to Martin's question, that in terms of history, there are probably both aspects, as you mentioned, David. There were moments of battle and war, and there were moments of welcome and embrace. And we see that within the Bible itself, where you have references when the Israelites returned from their being in exile in Babylonia, and the prophets say, what are you doing? You've married non-Jewish women, you have to expel them all. And so you think, oh, well, that's the point of view that the Bible conveys. But then you have the book of Ruth, which we read as the book to read during Shavuot, when we're celebrating the moment at Sinai. And of course, the book of Ruth is all about a woman who was not just non-Jewish, but she was a Moabite, the supreme enemy of the Jewish people. And she is embraced by the Jewish people, and her being embraced transforms the Jewish world and ultimately results in the birth of King David. So to say that there's both aspects at play here, I think is also maybe saying something about each one of us, about the extent to which we all perhaps struggle with notions of wanting to be only with those that we understand and agree with, and then a desire to reach out beyond that and to embrace a much larger world. So thank you both for your comments. Let me invite Marty, and then I've got Richard here, and I think Steve and Robert. So Marty?
I have two observations. I was intrigued that you chose a work of art that you talked about as a reintroduction of bringing classics into the modern or more modern era. And as I recall, the book of Deuteronomy was a late addition to the canon, that it was found as they were cleaning out the temple hundreds of years, several centuries after the people arrived in Canaan. And so it is a reintroduction, and it often is a summary of the preceding books. And that's the way I view it. And it has a very different flavor than the other books, because it's basically summarizing and condensing, I think, what has occurred before. At least that's my view. I don't know if that's accurate.
Go ahead.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention is that you briefly referred to the possibility of a third temple. And I just want to point out that in my understanding, which may not be accurate, it was only through the destruction of the temple, the second temple, that we were able to realize rabbinical Judaism. And if the temple had stood, we never would have realized rabbinical Judaism, which we all rely on now. And most of the activities that had occurred in the temple are not things that modern people would likely accept. So I think there is no going back, just like the Christians can't. It took the death of Jesus to bring about Christianity. It took the destruction of the temple to bring about modern Judaism.
Oh, Marty, you have just summarized things so beautifully. Okay, so here's what I've learned from you. First of all, you reminded me, you said I chose a painting that focused on bringing a classical form, but then reinterpreting it, repurposing it. If you remember, I shared something similar with our last painting, that by Larry Rivers, who took a classic work of art, that of Washington crossing the Delaware, and he reframed it in a contemporary vocabulary in a way that both honored the past but broke from the past. And so Deuteronomy, now you've tied in what you've just said, ties into what Catherine's point was about memory, which is, if Deuteronomy is meant to be a reiteration, a repeat of what has happened, when we read it carefully, we see, well, it's not exactly what happened once before. There's some differences in the way the story is being told. And in a sense, that's the way memory works, right? Because memory is not merely playing a rewind of a film that you've recorded. It's the work of the human mind, which is playing both with what's happened in the past and a need to reformulate what happened in the past in order to live healthfully in the present. So thank you so much for bringing all those things together. Let me go upon Richard and Steve, and then I see Robert. Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi. Yes, I'll try to be brief. But the cistern and Jonathan Sachs's words about now we're going to have to take responsibility for our fights. And you take responsibility for your fights by being compassionate about what all war is all about. It's not about vengeance and killing. It's about maintaining stability for the widow and the orphan. And notwithstanding that, throughout this chapter, this portion, there are many times when they're said, okay, don't be afraid because God will be fighting your battles for you. That's not going to happen anymore. It's got to come from within. And how does it come from within? I think it comes from within by the flow of the cistern, that the energy that comes through when you're playing by the rules and are courteous. And I want to mention Esau in here because he's a prime character in there. He's already settled in the land, and look out for him, watch for him, maintain his territory. And when you see him, you're seeing as yourself. We're part of one thing here. So we're all fighting for each other because we've internalized God, and now we've got the power. And I wanted to mention here, when I got to this thing about Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, it reminded me of a certain saying that any assembly gathered for the sake of heaven will endure. Duration is the soul as opposed to the ego in time. And if it's not gathered for the sake of heaven, but for the sake of winning some desire or some physical well-being, it's not going to endure. And then I thought, who said that? Yochanan ben Zakkai.
My favorite man.
It sounds a lot like Jonathan Sachs, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's all I got to say.
Thank you so much, Richard. Let me invite Steve and then Robert.
Yeah, I'd like to tie it in with the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education. And your talk about Theodore Herzl bringing in the new land. He wanted to translate dreaming about it into action and actually doing it. At least that's my interpretation of what's written here.
Here's what's fascinating. Okay, so what's the name of the book in German? Old New Land, right? Old New Land, right? So he is bringing together an old concept and a new concept. Okay. When it came time to name one of the first settlements in the 20th century in the land of Israel, in 1908, I believe it was, people land near Jaffa and they have purchased this land and they want to name it after Theodor Herzl, who had inspired them. They wanted to name a place Herzliya.
Yeah.
But they realized that wouldn't work out too well politically because it was still being occupied by the Ottoman Empire. And so they didn't want to appear too subversive. So instead, they cleverly named it Tel Aviv. Tel is a site for an old civilization. Aviv means spring, something new. So what they cleverly did was they named something Old New, which was evocative of Herzl's book, The Old New Land. And so Herzl himself and these early pioneers realized that there's value to combining both old and new if you really want to create something new that will have roots. And so that's what's happening. That's what's happening here.
That's why you have Holocaust at the very
Yeah.
last.
Well, how does that
So
tie in with the painting here?
To this painting here?
Yeah.
Okay, so in the Manet painting, because Manet has taken a work of art from the Renaissance, from 300 years before, which work that by one of the greatest Renaissance painters, Raphael, whom the French establishment held in the highest regard. He's the marker of what constitutes great work of art. And he's taken that great work of art and he's reworked it in a contemporary vocabulary. So he has a way of, he's honored the past by making it, in a sense, within meaningful to his contemporary times by painting it this way.
Now, how does Dali fit into all this?
So Dali was someone who was, as a surrealist, he was primarily concerned and fascinated with the subconscious, with the dream dimension of life. And then he gets offered this commission by Samuel Shore. He said, I want you to paint 25 paintings that will celebrate the 20th anniversary of the founding of the state of Israel. And so the state of Israel had been a dream among Jews for thousands of years, ever since they were defeated by the Romans and expelled from the land. And so here's Dali, he's being challenged to try and figure out, in a sense, I'm fascinated with what's going on in people's dream life, and now I'm being asked to paint something that is a dream come true. And so what happens to a dream when you've realized it? Is it still as beautiful and meaningful as it was when it was just a dream life? Does it become sordid and tainted by having entered into this realm? And instead, what we get is perhaps what former president of Israel once said, which is Shimon Peres: never stop dreaming. Even while you try and create something new, never stop dreaming. So it's an ongoing process, is what the message seems to be.
Now, are these 25 pictures at the Oregon?
Yeah, so there are lithographs of the original 25 paintings that were done are on display for the next month at the Oregon Jewish Museum. Yeah. So let me call upon Robert.
Well, thank you again for a lovely evening. I always enjoy all the comments. You know, you triggered a thought that I never thought of before, but if I can remember it, a soul who does not dream only sleeps.
That's beautiful, Robert.
Thank you.
Yeah, because, you know, in life, dreams are part of the soul. You know, there are people around the world that cannot dream of what we do even. Some can, right? Because they haven't had that opportunity, but they can dream of something. You know, Catherine's comment really hit me about memory. And I thought, you know, how do we honor memory, whether we're a Baha'i looking at the martyrs that continue to be killed in Iran, whether it be in this time of the Torah. And I thought, well, you know, you can honor them outwardly by remembering the story. But I think the inward and the deeper memory and honoring is to the extent our lives fulfill what that dream was. And as an example, every time I've been on this Zoom call, always there's been, for all of us, the ideal that we should be better day by day, that our life should be a life of transformation, becoming better. And I think that is the ultimate way to honor these souls. You know, we can do it outwardly, but when we do the hard work, when we're really tested, I want to share a story briefly. Yesterday, I was at a writing class, it's poetry, etc. And, you know, we just share poetry and stuff. And there was a young man in his 30s that I met, and I chatted with him a little bit. Now, he was indigent, homeless, and he had pain. And I said to him, as we were walking out of the library, do you ever pray? And it was so clear that he wanted nothing to do with prayer. And I said to him, look, I've been there. Beseech him, beg him, ask him. He'll answer your prayers. So imagine some people can't dream really because they're dead inside. I think he was an alcoholic, frankly. You looked at his face, you could tell he had a tortured life and kind of a twisted way of things. So I'm very thankful to be on tonight with everyone. I always love the comments and I enjoy the study. But, the idea of remembering those, my mother remembered my grandmother and her grandmother and her grandmother through the love she gave my sister and I. That was the real memory, right?
Robert, it's so beautiful. And I want to thank you not only for sharing what you shared tonight, but I want to thank you for reaching out to that man in your writing class. That was
Thank you, Robert. Thank
a
you.
fine thing to do. Thank you. And let me invite Justin, please share with us.
Thank you, Rabbi. This sense of I mean, even the term when in Deuteronomy 16, what is it, 20, when they say justice, justice shall you pursue. And it's so that you may live and possess the land. Again, this possession of the land. The sense of owning one's own shadow in this is so strong. And Israel Charney, who wrote a book called The Encyclopedia of Genocide, a psychologist from Israel, wrote also about the denial of genocide. And one of the most important pieces in that is the awareness that to configure the sense of dealing with the denial that says, oh, our people couldn't. So this in this opening chapters of Deuteronomy, there's a continual invitation to own one's own shadow in a significant way. And this, I mean, so whatever Martin might be suggesting about those people is that it's held in the Torah of a community actually speaking ethically about this. That if there isn't some kind of ethical community that's actually addressing the shadow of genocide, then it's poison. It's poison to just simply take that suggestion. But but in the sense of a community that's reading and attempting to move forward ethically together, it's the most important and healing kind of conversation that can exist.
Thank you, Justin. And let me. So many beautiful things. Everything that's people have said has been so profound and beautiful. To try and cohere it, I want to suggest this journey that we've been on and we have accompanied the Israelites on. On one level, yes, it's a place from one piece of geography to another place of geography, from Egypt to the land of Canaan. But on another level, and I think perhaps the more profound level, it is about a journey from a place of dispossession of self, of being in exile, to being home. And what we mean by home, I think, is to be a settled person, to feel a sense of not only one's power, but to feel a sense of one's purpose, to have a sense of connection to all of existence. And so to be home means to combine all these things that we've been talking about. It means to dream. It also means to work to realize one's dream. It means to have compassion. It means to tell the story. It means to honor the past, even as one begins to reconfigure the past in order to be in the present and build towards the future. And Shabbat Hazon, to have a sense of vision, is insignificant unless one is also part of a community of dreamers and who share a vision of a world where justice prevails, where we take care of those who are vulnerable, and we sanctify every moment of life. And I'm so fortunate to be within a community of dreamers. Thank you so much. I look forward to our regathering. Be well, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank
Thank
you.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.